Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have a lineup of just absolutely terrifying Dogman encounters involving the military, law enforcement. Before we get into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's upload, shall we? Today's first encounter comes to us from a hunter out of that great state called Arkansas. It was June 13th, 2016 that I was making my way through a forest. Just doing a little small game hunting. I was toting my 12 gauge by my side and hoping that I'd run across some squirrel. I must tell you as I begin that I spend hundreds if not thousands of hours in the woods. If I'm not hunting, then I'm customarily out on a stroll. I'm very familiar with everything and anything that call these woods home, which is to say up until this day. I was taking the High Line, walking along the edge of a heavily wooded ravine, about 50 feet below the crest. The ravine itself descends some 200 feet or so below me. It was so heavily covered in the trees and low brush that from my position it seemed virtually impassable for man nor beast to navigate through it. I was following the game trail that I knew would bring me out to the other side, having been here so many times before. I didn't know it then, but I do now why suddenly I had the most unnerving feeling that I was being watched. Now, we've all had this feeling in the woods, but this was different. I felt in such a way that imminent danger was approaching me. That's the only way I can describe it. As I began to look around, trying to shake that feeling that had come over me, I suddenly noticed a patch of bright white below me in the undergrowth. It was as white as bleached undershirts are. Typically, when I'm in the woods, white color is usually acquainted with a deer's tail or the breast of a hawk or an owl. But this was much brighter and too large to be any of those. As I was staring at this white color in the brush, which was easily 200 feet or so away from me, down in the side of this ravine, I start to realize that there is a figure holding the white object, its coloration somewhat blending in with the surrounding brush. Keep in mind, up until this point, what I was seeing was maybe an inch tall at the distance I was looking, and with the naked eye. I set my shotgun down momentarily and pulled out my field glasses to zero in what was before me. I now had it in focus, a tall, wolf-like creature that was holding in its clutches a pure white cat. This creature was standing in the brush up to its waist, surrounded on both sides, and at its back with scrubby trees. It was staring directly at me as I was it. I could see clearly its head was that of a wolf or an Alaskan husky. The snout was long and tapered, and I could actually see its fangs protruding through its jowls. It had triangular-shaped ears that were pointed straight up and long but muscular arms were hanging from its sides. This wolf creature was standing perfectly still on two legs, just like a human being would, and was clutching a white, apparently a feral cat, in its hands. I could make out what were long, finger-like appendages, which were tipped with black, hawk-like talons, with the cat's spur being bloodied in several spots. The creature was staring directly at me, and I almost couldn't stand looking at it through the lenses. It was almost upsetting me in some dark and foreboding kind of way. The creature's upper torso, which I could plainly see was lean and muscular, being covered with sparse amount of hair or fur, whatever you want to call it, through which I could see its skin, while the head was completely covered in fur, like that of a wolf or any type of canine. Based on the surrounding brush height throughout that ravine, I estimated its height to be somewhere between 7 to 8 feet in height. And this thing didn't so much as blink for 10 minutes or more. Suddenly, the cat wriggled violently, as if, one final gasp, it was trying to free itself from this monster's clutches. I watched as the beast tightens its grasp. The struggle was over. I took my shotgun in hand and backtracked out of the woods, the entire time feeling as though I was being followed by this creature. Having seen this wolf man, I have never returned into this area of the woods again. My feeling now is that this creature could have torn me limb from limb, had it been given a chance to do so. The feeling that I had while we were staring at each other was pure, unadulterated evil. This thing was a demon from the pit of hell. All right, really quick. The statement that he made while talking about the ravine and the brush and bramble being too thick for man or beast to navigate through really resonated with me. In 94, as the majority of you guys know, is when I had my encounter. And my cat just very vocal tonight. So 94, I had my encounter, and I didn't realize how deep or thick the vegetation was when these creatures were essentially just zinging through the woods. That's what it seemed like. It seemed like they were on a dead sprint, and there was nothing stopping their trajectory. You know, where we were, they were building these houses, and there was a fresh road, a brand new road. So the majority of the woods and crap that they cut down to make this area, they had taken, probably chipped and hauled away. But a lot of it, they just pushed into the woods. And I didn't realize how deep or thick that wooded area was until my friend and I went back the next day. And when looking out through there, it was like 5 to 6 feet deep. Like, we're at the tree line and you're looking, and it's just dense brush, bramble, scrub pine, cut debris. And then beyond that, you have your normal forested area. Now that area has been built up. When we had our experience in 94, there was only 6 houses being built on that cul-de-sac. Since then, there is now a small development somewhere between 30 to 40 houses, and kids live out there with their parents, and they've made these trails and such. And I went out there, God, what was it, last summer before, and thank God I didn't see anything, but it was pretty eerie just being back there, you know? I did not like it. I did not like it at all. So, but I could really resonate with what he said. So let's get into tonight's next encounter. My experience happened in 1968 while engaged in the Vietnam War in the 101st Airborne Division. I was leading a reconnaissance patrol. I'd been in Vietnam for the better part of 2 years at the time of this experience, having survived 5 vicious firefights in the jungle. On this day, I was to lead a 6-man recon patrol, with our job being, as always, to find the Viet Cong wherever they were held up. 4 of the men assigned to me had never been in the jungle before, and one of the guys, CB, was 6'5" farm boy from Idaho, who could give a bear a run for his money. He was the biggest man in our patrol, and at his height, weighing somewhere between 275, he was a very intimidating human specimen, to say the least. Both he and I had survived 2 firefights together in close quarter fighting, so I was glad to have him. We were 2 days out, covered in face paint, leaf netting, the whole 9 yards. Our communication with each other was nothing but hand signals, facial expressions, and only the slightest whispers when being side by side. Other than that, it was dead silence the whole time. The Mekong at this time was a dense jungle and very difficult to navigate. In particular, while making no noise, the firefights which I had engaged in typically began with our enemy or ourselves moving and being detected by a perimeter guard. This is how we worked. 4 men rested, 2 watched. We were in a resting state, sitting in a small clearing. And when I say clearing, I'm talking about an oblong area in the jungle, maybe 50 feet long by 10 feet wide, filled with 2 to 3 foot tall plants. It was surrounded by a wall of dense trees, which, to many, may not seem much like a clearing, but in this jungle, that was about as good as you're going to get. We had only been sitting for maybe 10 minutes or so when there was some loud rustling in the brush just on the edge of this clearing in which we sat, maybe 40 feet away from us. All of us rose to our feet with our guns at ready, fully expecting for bullets to start flying at any second. But what happened next was out of this world. Suddenly, out of the jungle comes this half-human, half-monster creature, stepping into the clearing and facing us. All eyes were on it. And our gun sights followed. With not a word being spoken by any of us, this man-monster was at least 8 feet tall, and more likely than not, 500 to 600 pounds of just lean muscle. Of course, it was wearing no clothes and was covered in sparse long hair, with its skin being exposed throughout its body. In mere seconds, it took 2 steps at us, with its arms extended, as we all hit it with a front burst from our M16s. The beast spun and dropped on impact, falling to the ground as we began our retreat immediately. In the jungle, it's one and done when it comes to firing a gun. Every Viet Cong and her brother would be heading in our direction immediately, and there was no time to waste. We began to make our way out, leaving the monster dead on the ground. There was virtually no discussion of what had just happened. With all of us knowing that conversation in the jungle can cost you and your comrades their lives. But when we made it back to the compound, it was a buzz at what we had to share. I have no idea what we encountered that day. In some ways, it resembled a man, but only in the way that it stood on 2 legs like a man. with its face being configured somewhat like a human, but to me, it was a missing link kind of creature. What sealed the deal was when it virtually with no hesitation began to come at us after having emerged from the brush. It started to move very quickly, and then it was all over as soon as it had begun. The creature dropped to the ground like a sack of potatoes, and we split. All of us would have loved to have get up and close to it and see more of what it was, but that was not viable given the circumstances in which we found ourselves. But it was one hell of an experience, I can tell you that. You know, my dad was in Vietnam, just like many of your parents or fathers. And he was part of the Brownwater Navy. And I had asked him a couple of times about if he had seen anything strange out there. Growing up, I never asked him about, creatures or anything. He'd share periodic stories with me, like the two-step viper and stuff like that, and but he did say that one day they opened fire on a embankment as they were going upriver, and after the fire, the shooting stopped, because once one person shoots, at that point everyone's shooting, because it's do or die there. It was do or die, and you're dealing with 18 to 23-year-old men who never before seen a jungle. But he said that what one of the guys said was it was about the size of a gorilla, and it looked like it had something in its hand that it was going to throw like a spear, and it was not human. But they talk about the rock apes, and I really do. I'm a firm believer that Bigfoot and its, I guess, distant cousins, if you want to call them that, because I don't believe that I don't think the rock ape is a Bigfoot. They weren't described as being these 8 foot tall. They were like 4.5 to 6 feet tall. Some were described as. They weren't very big, and they would throw rocks, and they'd be in the trees, and they moved and acted as a village. This was just something completely different. I've also heard reptilian experience. I shared one on this channel a while ago, but you got to think these jungles in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia were just forgotten cities in the jungles. So if these cities were forgotten, I wonder if the people who lived in those cities eventually turned feral, and that's what people were calling the rock apes. Because if you think about like a pig, you release a pig to the wild, it turns into a hog, a wild hog eventually, and it doesn't take long. So how long would it be for a human to revert? Honestly, I mean, not like a pig, but a few generations to, no clothes. You're going to grow more hair. Your body will change. And it happens all the time, not with humans and such, because it's probably never been experimented. No, it probably has. But, what makes us any different than any other animal besides we can talk and we think we're smarter than everything else? But anyway, let's get into today's next encounter. All right, so the information I'm going to share with you guys right now, I was specifically asked to share what he wanted me to share. And then if there are no repercussions from what he shared, then he'll follow up with all of the details. So this is from a retired North Carolina state trooper. And they had been out on one of those wind boats, or whatever you want to call them. And they were just doing their basic, daily whatever routine. They had run into a couple of guys they knew that worked for the Fish and Game down there. And they were pretty close to the East Dismal Swamp, which obviously is east of the Great Dismal. And where they were, the North Carolina landscape, there's the land, a huge chunk of swamp, ocean, and then these little kind of islands that are all along the coast. At low tide, sometimes the islands get bigger because they're not real islands. The water just, if the ocean pushed back a little further, they wouldn't be islands. They'd be more land for North Carolina. Still swampland, but they had been out in that region. What they were essentially looking for were some marijuana farms and stuff. 2001. Things were a lot different than they are now, 23 years later. And it's crazy to say 2001 and then 23 years later. It's just nuts. So they are just doing their, due diligence. They had just kind of went to this alligator wildlife refuge, National Wildlife Refuge, which is by, I guess, the Emily and Richardson Pryor Buck Ridge Reserve. There's a bunch of little reserves in that area, I guess. And they had just been on their, their wind boat or whatever you want to call them, swamp boats. And he remembers over the noise of the fan and the vibration of everything, they heard and felt this thump, 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 thump. And him and the other state trooper that was with him are looking around, and he motions for the guy to cut the engine off, and so they do. And what he sees is a very distinct looking military helicopter, large helicopter, crash into the area of the alligator Lake, Alligator River area. They're right there. They are, quarter of a mile, eighth of a mile away. Some expletives are spoken, and they start the boat up and start heading that way. They get to the area and they see the helicopter is on its side. There's smoke coming out, and they have to get, so the water, picture swamp, real land, like land, not swamp land. Well, yeah, but land where you can stand and walk and not sink. And then more swamp. So they had to essentially pull their boat up onto land. And as they're walking, they're trying to figure out, how are we going to get to this helicopter? We can't get our boat over this because of the terrain. There's a bunch of, rock and broken down trees. Banyan, I think they're called, trees. It's if it was clean, they could probably get their boat up on through it. But it was just, torn apart from hurricanes and such. So they're walking and trying to figure out, what they're going to do. They called it in, and as they got a football field away, maybe a little less, they can see a couple of what appeared to be soldiers getting out of the helicopter. They're pulling themselves out of the helicopter. They're in basic camoed pants with that drab green t-shirt. All of a sudden, there's two soldiers standing out of the helicopter, assessing the damage in area. And what they see next is they see a hand come out and what appears to be a werewolf pull itself out of the helicopter. I asked him, immediately, did it have a tail? And he immediately said, Jeff, I was just going to say that to you. It had no tail. It was huge. We start yelling to the soldiers, because the soldiers are now, looking at the wreckage, how they're going to get across, where they're going to get to. And they're like, this creature's coming out behind these guys. The soldiers turn after they hear the two state troopers, and this creature jumps off of the helicopter into the waterway and takes off, going northwest out of there. The soldiers don't do anything. They watch it go. And then another one comes out. And as this one's out, it extends its hand into the helicopter and helps a soldier out. And it looks like there's a conversation. The state trooper's like, it looked like there was a conversation. And that one took off, going in the same direction the other one did. Eventually, more troopers came on scene. There was pretty much a rescue deployment. Military came out, and it was Army, but it was very hush-hush. Anyone that was like the state trooper, retired state trooper that contacted me, his rank or lower, or even a little higher, that weren't in the know, we're not in the know. And we're told to, just move on, go on with, help us do what we need to do. Anything you see here or may see here, leave here. These two state troopers were the only troopers that saw anything come out of that helicopter other than the human soldiers. But he said it honestly when that one jumped and it just took off like a bullet, gone. And there are alligator in that, and it was just like it didn't matter. It was, out of there. But then when the second one came out and it had pulled itself out and looked up at the two soldiers that were there, who are now looking at the state troopers, and it extended its arm and helped another soldier out, he said it really did look like there was some sort of conversation. And the creature understood what was being said, and it shot out faster than a bullet again, going the same way. And that's pretty much as he wants to share, because of certain things that were signed. He's never told his kids or his wife about this. The other state trooper that was with him has since passed away due to cancer. But as far as he knows, he didn't say anything to anyone either. So he just wants to make sure that if there are any repercussions, without too much being mentioned, he thinks he could cover his ass. So hopefully, fingers crossed, there are no repercussions, and he'll allow me to share a little bit more of what went down and what they saw. So moving on to tonight's next experience. In September of 1997, I had taken my two hounds out for a hike with me, north of Vermilion Lake, Minnesota, which is due east of my home at the time in Ely. I was a couple of hours into this hike, with the dogs rummaging around here and there in the brush. I had made my way into an area of open forest which comprised of tall tree with very little undergrowth, making for great visibility as I hiked along. Reggie was the first to bolt, and Sweetie followed. They were tearing it up into the trees when the two of them began to bark frantically. I started to jog to catch up to them, and as I finally had them in my sight, the two of them were darting around what was a large mound of black fur crouched on the ground. At that moment, there was no shape or form to what I was seeing, and the only thing that I could think of was a black bear that was either dead or lying in the woods. Still in a jog and edging ever closer to the dog, suddenly this mass launched from the ground, chasing after Reggie on 4 legs. I knew then that I had been looking at this beast from the rear. It had been lying on the ground, either sleeping or eating something, just like the dogs would do on a rug. Now, Sweetie was 100 pounds, and Reggie, being the larger of the two, was 115 pounds. When this thing launched to fend them off, its size in comparison to the dogs dwarfed them. They appeared like 2 puppies playing with its mama. It was a gigantic black wolf, such as the size I had never laid my eyes on, and based on its size versus my dogs, I'd have to say this thing weighed 400 to 500 pounds. I have seen many wolves in this state. They always travel in packs, but this thing was alone in jet black. Its size was not that of a timber wolf, and neither was its build. It had an absolutely massive body and head covered with black fur. The dogs were running in and out of it, trying to scamper away each time that it turned at them, all while barking relentlessly. It kept turning back to where it had been lying, obviously protecting some of its food. I saw it numerous times from the side view, and its body was at least 6 feet long, without the tail, with its back standing close to 4 feet from the ground. I don't know if it wasn't capable of running any faster, or if it just didn't think my dogs were worth the time or an effort, but it more or less seemed to just trot after them rather than bolt towards it and bite them, acting more like they were playing chase. This scenario played out for a minute or so before I called the dogs off and I left as fast as I could. Having made my way back home over the next couple of weeks, I had described what happened to a number of old-timers and seasoned hunters. More than a few of them said, "It sounds like you encountered a dire wolf, a species which is said to not exist anymore." I did a little more research and saw that it is said to exist alongside of the saber-toothed tiger in North America and had become extinct. Well, I am here to tell you that what I saw was certainly not extinct and was not traveling in a pack. This was an enormous and vicious creature, and it is living in Minnesota. All right, guys, so in the woods of America and throughout the world, Dogman, Bigfoot, crawlers, which people are new subscribers as such are asking what a crawler is, and the response is the real name for the rake. The rake is a creepypasta creature. Crawlers is the cryptozoological name for the rake. Those creatures exist, exist throughout our forests. But as many of you know that go to the live stream, they ain't just the only things out there. There are creatures that come out of portals and such. And then, every once in a while, you run into one of these. It was in early fall of 1997 that what I am about to share with you transpired. I expect nobody to believe this. Nevertheless, the entirety of what I am about to say did happen, and in the exact fashion which I will convey to you. I was solo hunting in the hill country of my state on what was a dreary day at best. This happened in Oregon. So I was solo hunting in the hill country of Oregon on a dreary day at best, with a soaking drizzle falling from the sky since about 5 a.m. I hadn't seen anything worth bragging about and just sat down on a big old log to take a breather and have a smoke. What does breathing have to do with smoking? You'll have to talk to another smoker to get that answer. Anyway, there I sat looking around in the mist and planning in my mind what my next move would be. It was then that my eyes caught a glimpse of what appeared to be somewhat triangular shape in the woods about 50 yards from me. The more I focused on this shape, the more confused I became. It was not moving, and I couldn't make out for the life of me what it was. So I stood up and walked over to have a look. After about the first 10 to 15 yards, I now thought that what I was seeing was a black drop cloth hanging on a stump or something to do with that effect. Perhaps even a dark-colored rain slicker that was somehow left behind by a hunter. It had a slight sheen to it from the soaking rain as I moved closer. I don't think that I was 30 feet away from this thing when suddenly it rose and turned. Well, let me tell you, I damn near jumped out of my skin and pointed my rifle squarely at it. Now, this is a difficult thing to describe because I am looking at what I think may be a raincoat, which suddenly lifts as I am approaching and begins to twist. I took about 2 steps backward as this coat or cloak completely turns, and they're staring at me with this pasty white complexion and the blackest, most emotionless eyes I had ever seen, is what appeared to be a young boy at 4 feet tall. He said nothing and was staring at me in what I can only describe as the evilest, coldest way I could ever experience. I was momentarily stunned when I broke the silence. "What are you doing here?" With that, this child thing waves at me with its arms in a way that said, "Follow me." I was stunned, but something compelled me to follow at a distance, which I did. The boy was wearing a cloak that had a hood, and it ran down to the ground, kind of dragging along behind him as he walked. I had seen his face under that hood, and his forearm when he waved to me to follow, and his skin was white as chalk, but his eyes were like that of a great white shark peering out from under the peak of the hood. He was walking ahead of me, not turning so much as to see if I was still following. I was keeping a distance of about 30 yards from him at this point, fully expecting something to happen at any moment. Now you may ask why I was following at all, and that would be a very logical question to ask, but all I can say is that I was not fully in control of myself at the time. I felt as though I was being compelled by some strange force to follow, so I did. I walked for 20 minutes following at the same distance when the boy suddenly stopped and crouched back down in the very same way as I had initially seen him. And I brought my rifle to bear once again. The forest was deathly silent as I stood and waited, with my eyes darting here and there, looking for anything to move, fully expecting something to happen at any moment. 10 minutes must have passed when the boy once again rose, turned to face me, extended his arm in a pointing motion up this hill to my left. He then turned and walked away into the trees and was gone from view in a matter of seconds. The better description would be that of sliding away from me, kind of like Gumby in the cartoon. The woods were fairly open where we stood, and he just seemed to vanish as he walked away. It was like he dematerialized before my very eyes. When he vanished, I felt like the spell or something had been broken. Similar to coming out of being under anesthesia, I stood there gathering my thoughts. A few minutes had passed, and I lit another cigarette as I approached the point where he had been standing, extending his arm in the eastern direction toward the hill, and I began to look. There was a clear game trail meandering through the woods, and I slowly began to follow the path heading up that hillside into the trees. when, about the midway point, I heard a deep grunt coming from my right. Turning quickly, I saw nothing as a loud crack came from up in the trail. I quickly spun in response to that crack, and there, standing in the middle of the trail, some 50 feet away, was an enormous Bigfoot. As I stood there looking up the hill at this creature, it towered over me. So large was it that, to my eyes, it seemed to be over 10 feet tall, and its shoulders extended off the trail, being obscured by the brush alongside it. It was snarling, curling its mouth in a way that said to me that I was a dead man, and I pulled the trigger. It darted off the trail so quickly it was a blur, and if you ask me, I hit it squarely with that shot. I heard nothing. There were no running sounds, and I had heard nothing fall to the ground, so I quickly fumbled to the chamber another round. I turned to backtrack, and as I did, a roar erupted from the trees in the direction of where I had originally heard the grunt, and some of the trees began to shake violently. This was followed by a scream that sounded something like a witch or someone being murdered by a knife. It was horrific. I fired a second shot into the trees blindly in response to the scream and ran like hell down that slope. The scream kept repeating behind me as I ran, but I did not dare to stop and look. I ran for 15 minutes non-stop until I had retreated to almost the same spot where I'd initially encountered this black-eyed child or creature. And I had stopped. I couldn't catch my breath, and I was frantic, which words cannot describe. It took about a half an hour for me to finally calm down at that point, where I was able to walk, and walk I did. No further sounds were coming from that hill, and I saw nothing else on my way out. Having had much time to think about this over the years, to me this black-eyed child was some kind of hellish fiend, sent to lead me to my death at the hands of this Bigfoot in the forest. And what that relationship between the two of them was, I have no idea. This Bigfoot was staring at me, and I couldn't distinguish between where its darkened eye sockets began to where its eyes were. They were like two demonic black indentations within its face. Its teeth were yellowed and cracked, with long, scraggly hair hanging from its brow and its side of its head. It was definitely a male for obvious reasons, and its body mass was incredible. I don't know how I survived, but I am here to share this experience, and now you have heard it for yourself. And there you have it, folks, today's upload. I do hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. After all, it is your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and honestly what gives folks like all of us a place and a chance to share our experiences and our theories judgment-free, just simply treated with the respect we all deserve. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions. Never stop searching for the truth. And God bless.